Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Abosh Jacobson. I am the Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I am pleased to welcome you to the final installment of this summer's Survivor and Second Generation Speaker Series. Today we will be hearing from Julie Meetal Berman, who will be telling us the story of her parents' experiences during the Holocaust, mostly in Hungary. Before we get started with that, I wanted to thank our sponsor for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, Ernst & Young LLP. And I would also like to thank our community partners for this series, Avance North Texas, Communities Foundation of Texas, Educational First Steps, Faith Forward Dallas, George W. Bush Presidential Center, International Rescue Committee in Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, REACH of Dallas, SMU Human Rights Program, Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. And a big thank you to all of you, because without your help, this series would not be possible, and we very much appreciate that you were partners with us for this. So today you will be hearing from Julie Meetal Berman. She will speak for about 45 to 50 minutes. After that, we will open the floor to question and answer from you, the audience. If you look on your screen, you will see a Q&A icon either in the bottom, on the bottom of your screen, or in one of the upper corners of the screen if you're coming to us via phone or tablet. Please feel free at any point during Julie's talk today to give a click on that and to type in your question, and we will get to those during the question and answer period. And now I would like to give you Julie Meetal Berman.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like Sarah said, my name is Julie Meetal Berman, and I'm here to tell you a story, a love story. So both of my parents were Holocaust survivors, and since I'm their daughter, that makes me the second generation of survivors. So this story is all about them and not about me at all. So these are my parents, Magda and Les Mittelman. Cute little couple, don't you all think? I think they're cute. And the picture in the middle is of them on their wedding day in 1945. Both of my parents came from a country called Hungary. Hungary is in Eastern Europe. It's not the largest country. It's fairly small compared to Poland and Germany, but it's completely surrounded by other countries, as you can see on the map. My mom came from a small town called Szolnok, and my father came from the second largest city in Hungary called Deportation. So life before the Holocaust was pretty much like your lives. My grandparents were both hardworking. They both had jobs. My grandmother, whose name is Julie, who I'm named after, was a seamstress. She made clothes for other people. Back in those days, we didn't have department stores where you can just go in and pull something off the rack. You had to have your clothes made. So she made clothes for people. And my grandfather was a salesman, so he traveled quite a bit. The picture in the middle is of my mom when she was about 3 years old with her older sister. And the picture on the right is of the family at a wedding in 1939, probably one of the last time the entire family got together before the war broke out. My mom's family was not very religious, so they would go to synagogue probably about once a year for the high holidays. And my mom went to a public school, and this is her class picture from when she was 16 years old. My father's side of the family was a little more middle class. My grandfather had his own business. He made furniture for people. And many times after school, my father would go and help him out and learn the trade. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom. She had 3 boys and a girl to take care of. They were a little bit more religious than my mom's side of the family, so my father went to religious school, and that's his class picture. And I don't know if you can see, but his picture is, his face is in the red circle. And he also sang in the synagogue choir, but many times he wouldn't show up for a rehearsal because he was too busy playing soccer. So then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland and the war began. Hungary did not actually join the war yet, but they were sympathetic to the Germans, so they were on the German side. So the first order that came from the government was that all the men over the age of 18 had to enlist into the military. And soon after that, all the men who were Jewish had to start wearing a yellow armband so that they can tell them apart. And then they took all of these men and formed work battalions, basically slave labor, because from this point on, they couldn't go home anymore. They couldn't visit their families. They couldn't receive mail from their families. Their families didn't know if they were dead or alive. And they were taken all over Hungary to do work in preparation for the day when Germany will actually invade or come into Hungary. So in the next slide, you're going to meet my father, and he's going to tell you about the first place where he was taken with this work battalion.
Well, they sometime, where we were housing, there was a elementary school. And she had a friend maybe 2 blocks further. And they knew in the city a lot of Jewish boys there. So the Jewish girls, they came to visiting there. They saying, you need something, we can bring you, etc. There I met with her. And I was there about 10 months in Szolnok. And that's the place which is the most comfortable, well, because I get a very good friend, one of the Hungarian sergeant, who knows I met with the girl and I want to go to visiting her. And sometime he take me out from the camp to let me go there, and he picked me up later to go take back to the camp.
So even though Hungary did not actually join the war yet, anti-Semitism was getting very, very bad. Propaganda was all against the Jews. The Jews were not allowed to open their stores. The kids couldn't go to school anymore. And so things were getting very bad. So in the next video, you're going to hear my mom talking about how she had to start wearing the yellow star.
We gathered the yellow stars. We had to wear the yellow stars, and we can go out on the street. My mother, everybody had it to make by herself. My mother did it, and I was putting on my coat, on my dress also, because I get a job, and I went to work with my, with the yellow star.
So after 10 months, my father and his group were shipped out to the Russian front. The Russian front was the border between Poland and Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. So in the next video, my father will talk about his first experience with Germans, actually, because up until now, he was in Hungary and was dealing with the Hungarian military. So when he got to the Russian front, that was the first time he actually came in contact with the Germans. And he'll tell you what he had to do there.
And there we get a German. And those Germans, they were taking us next to their barrack, and they used us for putting down mines. they signed up an area where we had to put mines there. They show us how to put, or cleaning mines. The first day experience what we had, the two boys blew up on that minefield, what they put them up. They didn't do that right, they were careless and stepped on the mine what the another one put it down, because they didn't mark them.
So here, we're pretty lucky to have a couple of pictures of my father with his work battalion unit on the Russian front. So you can see my father sitting there, and in the second picture where the arrow is pointing to him. And you can also see that they're wearing Hungarian army uniforms, but you can also see the yellow armband on their sleeve. So as they were going all along the Russian front, putting down landmines in preparation that someday the Russian army will try to come and liberate Poland, a wagon that carried the German supplies broke down. And the German in charge found out that my father used to work with his father and he knew how to build things, told my father that he was going to send him to the next little town nearby to have it fixed. So he shipped off my father to the next little town, and my father walked into this blacksmith's place to fix the wheel. And the old man who worked in that shop looked at my father and just started crying, just bawling. And my father said to him, "Why are you crying?" And the old man said, "Because you look so much like my son, and I haven't seen my son in 3 years. The Russian army came in here and they took him away, and I don't know if he's dead or alive." He said, "You come in here and sit down, and I'll bring you some food and some drink, and I'll do the repair work for you." And so he did. And my father had a great meal for a change, as you can imagine. And when the old man was done and was ready to send my father back to his unit, he said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he took him to the front door, and he pointed out to the middle of the town, and he said, "Do you see that hill over there in the middle of the town?" He said, "That hill consists of 9,000 Jews." He said 9,000 Jews from this town and the surrounding areas were rounded up. They were brought here. They were made to dig a ditch, and then they were shot and killed and buried. He said that hill did not stop moving for days. He said that hill will always be here as a reminder, especially to the town people who collaborated with the Nazis and told them where the Jews lived. So by now it was already 1944, and Hungary actually joined the war. It became part of the Nazi regime. And as the Germans came in, the first order that came was that all the Jews had to go to the ghetto. So the ghetto could have been a building, it could have been a neighborhood, it could have been an area, depending on how many Jews lived in that town, depended on what the ghetto was going to be. So since Szolnok was such a small little town, the ghetto was the school building. And so here in these pictures, you can see how some people are starting to move some things into the ghetto on some cart. You can see the Hungarian policeman standing there, and you can see the smile on his face. He's pretty pleased with what's going on. And then you can see how they're boarding up the entrance. So once you're in the ghetto, you can't go out. You can't go bring food for your family. You can't go to school. You can't go to work. You're given a ration of food. And you're in very tight quarters because everybody and their grandmothers are all in there. So in the next slide, my mom's going to talk about having to go to the ghetto. But first, she's going to talk about a chance meeting she had with a German who tried to warn her and why she didn't just leave.
First, that he was in Romania, and he saw how the Germans, they people, they picking up children on people on the street, from the street, throwing up on a truck, and they just taking it. And he told they will happen here too. Don't stay here. Go away from here. Where to go? Now where to go? And he told me that he's giving me an address in Berlin. And he told, go to Berlin. And I give you an address where to go. And I told him, I'm not going. I am not leaving my parents. I am going where my parents will go. And then one nice day there came two policemen, and I told, you have to pick up all your things, not too many things, because you are going to the ghetto. So we picked up some bedside, bed things, a pillow and a comforter, and couple of things, dish, and on a little buggy, and we just pull it in the ghetto.
So after a few weeks in the ghetto, another order came that said, you're all going to be deported. You're going to be sent away. So they didn't tell them where they're going, but they just said, gather up whatever you can carry and head over to the railroad station. So here in these pictures, you can see how people are having to walk through the center of the town, right in the middle, and they're being marched over to the railroad stations. But what do you see on the side? You see people standing there just watching as this big group of people are being taken away. These are bystanders, people who they've known all of their lives. People they worked with, people they went to school with, their neighbors, their friends. They're all standing there on the side, just watching. And the other picture, you see them there at the railroad stations, and you can see how confused they look. They don't know what's happening. They don't know where they're going. They're not being told anything. So in the next video, my mom is going to talk about the deportation, and she's going to call the trains wagons. Some people call them boxcars, other people call them cattle cars. She calls them wagons.
And nobody was telling us anything. And we was going with the second transport. The first transport went in Vienna. We didn't know that. The second transport went to Auschwitz. We didn't know where we going. And we was in the train on this day and on the way to Auschwitz.
Were there other people on the train?
Oh, and the train was full. And the train was full with people. We hardly can sit down.
How old were you?
So I was 20. Well, they was rushing up us to the wagons. They was even pushing us up on the wagon.
Who was pushing you?
The Germans. And we was about in this wagon. I mean, there was about 5, which one going, or maybe more. We was about 100 people in this wagon, and there was also an old man on the other side in a wheelchair. They was putting on with the wheelchair, and we start to go. We didn't know where we going, but we just moved out, and we was about 3 days on the road was going when we saw a chimney, 2 big chimney in the distance, and they was burning. The flame was high up on the sky. And my mother told us that, well, I don't know where we're going, but you get ready that maybe we're going right in the flame. And I don't know why, but I just didn't feel anything. I saw the flame. I didn't feel anything. And then we went closer to the place. Then we smelled the flesh, the burning flesh. And finally, the train pulled in and stopped.
So in less than 2 months, Hungary deported 440,000 Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz. Out of those 440,000, 320,000 were murdered as soon as they got there. So that's a huge number to really comprehend. So if you would take 20 people in a group, then 15 of those 20 would have been murdered right off the bat, just so you can see the proportions. So now she's arrived in Auschwitz, and here you can see in this picture, you can see the train that had pulled in, you can see the smoke in the sky and the entrance to Auschwitz, and you can see the people as they're coming off, they're milling around trying to find family members, trying to figure out what's going on. And you can see the German soldiers in the front. You can almost hear them barking orders at them to get organized. And in the second picture, you can see they are a little bit more organized, women on the one side and men on the other. And notice how many more women there are than men. Remember that all the men had already been drafted into the military by Hungary. So the only ones that were left were either too young or too old to be of any use. So now my mom's going to talk about the arrival to Auschwitz.
There was all our relatives, and I was waiting until they coming down. And then I looked in and I saw the door open in the other side. And there was the flame. And the soldier who was opened the door, they pushed down the wheelchair with the old man. And then I was running after my mother, and we, two of us, it was dark, it was evening, it was raining. And my mother picked some towels and we put on the head, and we started to going. When I looked back, on the man's just still was standing there in the coat like my father outside. But when we went, it was light because all the reflectors was on. And I saw when we passed it, there was a hill of baby shoes. And right beside this, there was an older hill with eyeglasses. And I told to my mother, where we are going? And from distance, there was a fence, and the woman was standing there and hollering that, give the babies to the mother, give the babies to your grandmother or your mother. But they was keep, hollering to us. And we passed this part and we went to a bathhouse. And then we went through all this cleaning of the hair on the body, on the whole body. Well, they was coming also behind us to the same place. But when we started to go, I was looking back. He was still standing there on the first lane in the men's section. And I saw my father. He was looking so sad and so poor with this long winter coat on him. And I just wanted so much to go back to tell him a goodbye. But they was rushing us, and we went in this bathhouse when they cleaned off us, and then after the cutting of the hair, we went to the shower. And when we came out from the shower, they gave us some rags to wear it, which one of them was this short, the other was this long. So we was trying to change him. So when we came out in a big room, there was the men's already, but very few men's came back from the shower. There wasn't more than a dozen.
So you understand that when they went to the shower, they never knew what was going to happen. Could be that they went to the shower and there was water coming down like you would expect in a shower, or they went to the shower and it would be gas and everybody in there would have been killed within a few minutes. So again, not too many men, not more than a dozen men came out of the showers because they were either too old or too young to be of any use. So now she was in Auschwitz, and here you can see in the one picture how crowded the conditions are. In the barracks, you have bunks, wooden bunks, and sometimes you have 3-4 people to a bunk. Sometimes they're on the concrete floor. When it's cold, there's nothing to make their life more comfortable. There are no mattresses, there's no pillows, there's no comforters or blankets. They're in there, stuffed and cramped, and there's no heat. So imagine in the cold winters in Poland how cold it is. And in the second picture, you see a group of women. They look fairly young. Their heads have been shaven off, and they're wearing some kind of a uniform. So they probably just came through a selection. So in the next video, my mom's going to talk about the selections.
The selection, we went out there was a big place before, right in the entrance, and they was taking at us, and naked. And then I saw first time Mengele, Dr. Mengele, and he was selecting. He selected out my cousin first. And she went on then a couple of weeks later, they tried to do it to hurt us. On the holidays, there was always selection. On every selection, Mengele showed up. The second selection was about in Rosh Hashanah. And then they selected me. And we were sitting there on the Platz, upper Platz they called, and waiting for, to go. They take it to the or in the shower or right to the station, but usually they give it some normal dress before, they send it to a transport. So, but we were sitting there on the front of the, entrance and was waiting there, and I was thinking about my mother, that I leave my mother and my sister and my youngest sister. I always felt she was always very, very thin, and my mother always worried about her, and I was worried too, and I didn't want to leave them. And then I just jumped up and I started to running. And there was a German soldier who was a priest in civil, and a bunch of women around him and listening, his predication. And then I just crawled in the middle. And then saw the post who was after me. He lost me. So I went back to my mother and sister, and we was there until Yom Kippur, and there was an order selection, and they selected my sister. And then I was smarter because I tried to hiding. And they selected my sister. And my sister was gone. Later, they was making a selection again. And every selection I was hiding. And I never was in my mind that they will select old people or not young people, because until this time they always was selecting the young people who they take at work, here and there and everywhere. And this time I was hiding, and my mother was on the selection. When I came back, I find out that my mother is not there. I was running out on the street, and I saw my mother is marching, marching there with a bunch of women. They all has a white hair. And I started to running after her and hollering her, but I don't know, he didn't hear me. And I was keep running on the Blockeltester, who was responsible for everybody. She was running after me, and she was trying to find down me. And she told, you have to come back, and don't worry about the people. Don't worry about my mother, where she went. Then she was telling me that she by herself was taking her mother to the gas chamber. And it wasn't felt me better, I tell you the truth.
So now she was all alone. But a few weeks later, the Germans were beginning to worry that the Russians were starting to come over the border and that Auschwitz was going to be liberated. So they packed up 2 trainloads of people, and if you've ever watched or read the story of Anne Frank, you know that Anne Frank was also on one of these 2 trains that was transported from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, which is in Germany. So my mom was on this train. And when she got to Bergen-Belsen, she found that the conditions there were even worse than they were in Auschwitz, if you can imagine that. There was a lot of hunger. There was a lot of unsanitary conditions. People were dying everywhere. But she found her sister and her cousin, both of them alive. But a few days later, again, the Nazis decided to move people because now the British were coming from the west. So the Russians are starting to come from the east, the British are coming from the west, and the Americans are coming from the south. So they're starting to move in on Germany and Poland. And so they decided to move people again because they were worried that Bergen-Belsen would be liberated by the British. So this time they couldn't put them on a train because the train became targets for the Allies. So they decided to walk them. So these walks were called death marches because they would walk mostly at night, but sometimes during the day also, and they would walk deeper, further into Germany, hoping to get to another concentration or extermination camp where they can kill off more Jews. So now we're going to switch back to my father. Remember where we left him off? He was somewhere over on the Russian front putting down landmines. Well, the Russians are starting to come. So the unit he was in decided to move back into Poland to get away from the Russians that are now coming. And as they're going along, moving into Poland, again, a wagon breaks down, and the German in charge tells my father to pick a couple of guys and stay there at the side of the road, repair the wagon, and then when he's done, just come and follow them, because he wanted to get the heck out of here because the Russians are coming. So they went on ahead, and my father and his 2 friends were left there on the side of the road. And when they were out of sight, my father looked at his friends and he said, "I'm not an idiot. I'm not following them. We're out of here." And so they took off. They escaped, and they went into a nearby woods. And when they came into the woods, they found a group of people who said that they were partisans. They were resistance fighters. And they told my father and his friends, "If you want to join us, you can join us." And so my father and his friends joined them. And what they found is that this group goes out a lot of times at night, sometimes in the daytime, and they sabotage. They blow up German installations, they blow up train tracks, they blow up bridges, anything that they could do to keep the Germans there and allow time for the Russians, the Americans, and the British to get there and liberate them. So my father joined, and they found also that the people who were in this group, they were Jewish, they were Polish, they were Christian, they were Catholics, they were Russians, Hungarians, anybody and everybody who wanted to join can join, as long as they wanted to fight the Germans. So as the Russians were getting closer to Warsaw, my father and his group was there waiting for them and keeping the Germans back. So he was part of the partisan group called the Polish Home Army. It was a large group, and when the Russians were getting closer, the partisans were bringing out the Germans, making them more visible for the Russian army. So now, in the next video, my father's going to talk about his time in Warsaw.
The Warsaw was under German occupation. Germans, they were there. The ghetto was burned already. And they knew it. We have to go in because the Russians getting close to the river, and another side, Wisla. That was the name of the river which is cut at Warsaw half. One side, that one name was the river Wisla. One side was Warsaw city, on the other side, some suburb or that one. So they expected there the Russian. We was planning to stay there on opposite side, the German side, to anything what we can destroy there. We were 18 people there. And we were hiding daytime in the houses. In the evening we went out. The second evening I was together with one of my friends and the big guy, and with another, with Smith, and we was playing with the machine gun. We was set up with the machine gun. And the German patrol who came around there, and that's what we were holding them up. And we had to move back because they were coming up, the Germans, with the tanks. So we moved back about 5 miles from there, about 5 miles, about an hour and a half walk back in the forest, so not to find us. And there they had some small place, building, some kind of storage, something. We pulled them there to sit there during the daytime. The Germans, they know they have groups there around that city, which is guerrilla groups, and they want to get rid of it. And the German airplane, Germans took us, they came at daytime looking us. And they find that building because he turned back, and when we saw his turn back, we jumped out from the building, and some ditches closed there. We lay down there. They started to hit bombing that building, and they shooting machine gun. So that building, what we had, I just started. We went there when we got there to sleeping there. I took off everything, just the pants in the shirt I had there. And there I had the watch in my pocket that I got from my girlfriend when I met with her in Szolnok before we left. He gave me a silver watch, a flat one, what they were wearing in the small pocket. I left there, so the watch is burned there with my everything else. And we were lucky because we got away without any scratch with the German gun, and we tried to go back to the unit. So we got back to the basic unit, and the third day we went back to the Warsaw again, because every night a different group went there. So the third night was our to go there. So I went there. We were sitting on the top of the storage place, on a higher place, We were sitting there. And the Germans, they were patrolling, and they show us up there on the hill, on the top of the building, and they started shooting us. And we was replying there, and I was in the machine gun, and Sam, he was with me with the belt, which is the heavy, you know, they call them, and the bullet to get into the gun. And a minute I was telling Sam, I don't get supply. I stuck. What are you doing? I looking at Sam. Sam had no head. They cut. You know, they were shooting them with the machine guns, and I don't know. They was some kind of grenades, and probably that one of them cut his head. Just he had no hair, right next to me. Oh my God! I said, I had full bloody. And behind the building was my friend who was preparing to fill the belt with the bullet. I said to him, Reisner, let's go from here, because the gun is gone. We have no way where to stay here. And we tried to go, getting darker that day. We tried to go next to the building. We were laying down behind them. And we know we had a plan to 10 o'clock evening to get one spot where we're supposed to get together to moving back further. And evening at the evening, I said, no, right, we have to move. So we started to going slowly, and they were shoot up those candles, like with the air, they're shooting up candles, which is coming back down with the parachute, and they light up the whole area. So when they shoot up, they picked up us with the light, and they started the shooting. The first cut, what they getting, I get hit. They hit me, my leg, a couple of places. My legs get hit from here down, and I couldn't stand up on it. And I am telling to my friend, Reisner, I can't stand on my legs. Would you help me to go try to get to the house? He said to me, you crazy. How can I help you? Everyone is going to die here. I can't help you. I can't help myself. And he left me there. So I was staying there. You know, the biggest wound was my knee. And I had to tear my shirt and try to clean in the top behind that, but I couldn't move. So I would stay there about get completely dark, and I tried to crawling from there. And again, you know, the candles went up in the air, and they saw me there, and I got a second time. And they shoot me that time on my arm, my head, and on my back. So I was there. I couldn't move. I was bleeding there, and I left there unconscious. And I waked up next couple of hours later, probably. They were carrying me. They're carrying me on the stretcher to Polak. They're taking me somewhere. And that time, I have to mention to you, I was wearing a Hungarian army uniform. What we was taking during the time when we were in the guerrillas, they were robbing one of the storage place what they had, the armies there. So they don't know who I am. They know I had wearing a uniform, which is not Polish, not Russian. They know Germans, that's a Hungarian uniform. So they carried me to the first aid place. They took me to first aid place, and the two boys who there carried the stretcher, they know me, because they were part of there, but they get caught with the Germans. They caught him. And one of them is telling me in my ear, don't worry, Magyar. That's the way the Polak call the Hungarian. Don't worry, Magyar. M-A-G-A. Because we're not going to tell them who you are.
So my father was shot, 13 bullets across his body. The Germans picked him up because, like he said, he was wearing a Hungarian army uniform, and they probably thought that he was just a Hungarian soldier who got caught in the crossfire. They took him to a field hospital where a doctor operated on him, and when my father woke up, he found that he's in a room all by himself, quarantined. So what happened, the doctor who operated on him realized this guy is Jewish. And the doctor quarantined my father away from the other German soldiers in the hospital. And the doctor would come a couple of times a day, would bring him food and would change his bandages and nurse him back to health. This went on for a few weeks until one night the doctor came and said, tonight after dark, when everyone goes to sleep, you need to crawl out the window and leave here, because tomorrow we're being shipped back to Germany because the Russians are going to overtake the city. So my father crawled out the window and on crutches started to make his way back to Hungary. So the war was coming to an end. Germany and Poland was being bombarded all the time. But remember, my mom is still on that death walk. She is still walking around somewhere in Germany, in Bavaria, where the Germans are hoping to get them to a concentration camp or an extermination camp where they can get them killed. So now my mom's going to talk about how she was liberated.
Well, we was working in the factory until March. In March, they was coming the British, and we had to, move from there. I mean, they wanted to take back to Bergen-Belsen, so we went on the road to walk until Bergen-Belsen, but Bergen-Belsen fell to the English, to the British, and they can't take there. So we was walking to Bavaria.
Walking?
For the walking to the mountains. We was walking usually in the night, but sometimes we was walking on the day too. It was snowy and slippery and through to the mountain where it was terrible. My sister was all the time with me. I was watching her carefully. I was taking care of her how I can. And we arrived in Dresden station. When we arrived there was an air raid. On the Germans, they just closed the doors, and they ran to the bunkers in Germany, and in the middle of Germany. And we was praying in this weekend, because this, we was up and down, jumping up and down on the first train, and then we went on the road, and we was going to a really wooded area, lots, not wood, trees area. Both sides of the road is trees, and we was going on. A friend of ours had an infection in the leg, and we was helping her on the two sides and carrying her little bag. And when we passed a little wood house on the side, then I went inside and I just pushed them out behind the little building. And we were standing there all the way until this whole big transport is passed by. We went in this village. We just picked up a house and we went in and we asked some food. And there, this lady invited in and gave us some sandwich. And when we left, she gave us a bag cooked potato. And she came out to the door with us and she told, this way coming the Russians, and this way they coming the Americans. And then I told my sister, okay, let's go to America. And we went on this way, and we find 3 soldiers was coming on the bicycle.
So the war was over, and now there's a lot of confusion. Everybody wants to get home. There are American soldiers, British soldiers, Russian soldiers, German soldiers. There are people displaced, and there are some survivors who can still maneuver on their own. Everybody's trying to get home. So my mom had to make her way through Germany, through Austria, and back to Hungary. A lot of times that was on foot. There was no train service. So they traveled very slowly, and finally she got back to Hungary, to her hometown. And of course, everybody's looking for a family, who survived, who didn't survive. She didn't know who came back and who didn't. So she decided to go look at all the different little towns where they used to live. But before she started looking, she decided to take a chance and send a telegram to Debrecen to see if my father came back. And she said, "I'm back, come and get me." And then she left. She went to the next little town, but every time she would go to a different town, she would leave a little note to say, "If Les comes, tell him I went to that town." And in the next town, she would leave another note, "If Les comes, tell him I went to this town." So my father made his way back through what today is the Czech Republic, all the way back to Debrecen. And the day after he got back, his mom and his older sister with a 5-year-old also got back, which was really a miracle because older people and the very young usually did not survive. And he got her telegram. So off he went right away to Szolnok to find my mom. But when he got there, he found a note that said, "I went to this town." So he went to this town and found another note that said, "I went to that town." And so he followed her notes all the way around until he finally caught up with her, and they were married the next day. And you saw their picture in the first slides. So then, in 1949, a few years after the war, and they're trying to put their lives together, Hungary decides to become a communist country. So that was it. My father said, "I'm done with Hungary. We're leaving." So you don't just leave a communist country, you have to escape. So they had to escape off to Austria, almost like The Sound of Music, over the border into Austria, and then made their way to Italy. And from Italy, they made their way to Israel. They got to Israel, 1949. Guess what's going on? There's a war going on. So again, my father joins the military, but this time he's fighting for the reestablishment of the Jewish homeland. So I was born in Israel, and in 1964, my family moved to the United States, and in 1986, my parents joined me here in Texas. So here's the family that has grown out of that story. And the only thing I would like to leave you with before I conclude is that when my father recorded this video, he wanted to leave a message at the end. And he said, "If you think that something like the Holocaust could never happen again," he said, "you're wrong. And if you think it couldn't happen here in the United States, you're very wrong. And if you think it can only happen to the Jewish people," he said, "you're dead wrong." He said, "You need to pay attention to what's going on all the time and do your own homework, because propaganda is a powerful tool, and people can be convinced and forced to make decisions that normally they wouldn't." He said, "Always pay attention, always do your own homework, and do the right thing. If you see something that's not right, be an upstander, not a bystander." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie, so much. That's an incredible story. Just a comment before we begin with some questions. Linda Hoover wanted you to know that she thought it was a very heartwarming story for a difficult time, and she thanks you for sharing, and she says she can't stop crying, both tears of horror and of joy. So if telling your parents story and testimony is meant to leaving a lasting impact, I would say. Job well done.
That's why I do it.
Okay, so the first question I have is from Larry Schwartz. He had a question about schooling. You had said that your father could not go to school. His father, Larry Schwartz's father, was also a survivor, and he was from Germany. And in Germany, he was sent to a Jewish school under the Nazis before he left. And so he was wondering, did they ban school completely for Jews in Hungary as this began?
No, actually, my father went to school until he was 18, until 1939. He was in school. Then after the Germans, after the war began, that's when they shut down the schools in Hungary as well and had all the anti-Jewish laws in Hungary. But up until then, he was in school, in Jewish school. I had a picture of him up on the screen. And so, yeah, as far as I know, he did go to school until he had to enlist.
Okay. Henry Doris would like to know how many of your family members went to camps during the Holocaust and how many survived?
Not many survived. They all went to camps. On my mom's side of the family, it was 3 sisters and a cousin who survived. The ones my mom's talking about, the cousin and her 2 sisters survived. Everybody else in the family was killed. On my father's side of the family, his brothers and sisters survived, and his mother. And a couple of cousins, everybody else was gone.
Ron Schwartz wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the video testimonies that you used to help tell your parents' stories. He thought they were incredible, and he wanted to know if you recorded them, if they were recorded by somebody else, and how long ago were they done, and how many hours do you have? And just by way of information, Ron tells his father's story as well, so he has a very specific interest.
Right, I know Ron. The interviews were done by the Shoah Foundation back in 95, 96, when Steven Spielberg began the Shoah Foundation. He went around the world, actually, and interviewed survivors. So my parents, up until that point, never talked about their stories. And when I heard about the Shoah Foundation and that this is going on, I actually had to force them to do the interview. And that's when I first heard their entire story. They each did 2 hours worth of interviews, which is what you're seeing, just a minute part of their story. And it is a treasure to me to have videos of the entire story. Yeah, they did a fantastic job, and all the people who interviewed were especially trained to talk to the survivors and ask pertinent questions.
Julie, Charlotte Kimmel would like to know if your parents are still alive or if they've passed away. And if they've passed away, she'd like to know when that happened.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're both gone. My father passed away in 1997, only a few years after he did this interview. And my mom passed away in 2014. Not very long ago, but 6 years ago now. Doesn't seem so long. And I do this presentation, and every time I do it, I feel like I'm back with them. So this is very good for me.
Julie, you shared a little bit about your father's view that this could happen again and that we can never let our guard down. Could you share just like 2 minutes worth of your memories in Jerusalem or in Israel of the time when the Jewish state made a decision that they were going to make sure that this never happened again, when they put Adolf Eichmann on trial? And you were a little girl when that happened. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I actually do remember. I was very little. I was probably maybe 8 or 9 years old when it happened, and I do remember the trials. What I most remember is that, well, I grew up in northern Israel, on the border between Syria and Israel. So we were in a little town called the Moshav, and we were bombed continuously. But what was interesting about this little town is that it was made up completely of survivors. Almost everybody in that little village, it was more like a village, was a survivor. So we were all kids of survivors, and our parents really never talked about what happened to them. They were young, they were pioneers, they were building the new Jewish state. But I remember them at night, a lot of whispering with the neighbors, a lot, and all the time you can hear the word Eichmann coming up as they were whispering amongst themselves, making sure that we as kids didn't hear about it. They didn't want us to know those horrors, which is why my parents never really talked about their stories. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you. Yes. We are out of time for today, so I want to thank you so much for sharing your parents' Les and Magda Mittelman's stories. And I wanted to leave you letting you know that Ellen Kay and Julie Croft both thank you tremendously for having shared their testimony. And I would like to thank again our sponsors for the summer, and to thank everybody who has come to these various sessions virtually over the course of the summer. This was the final one for the summer, and we hope you have a good rest of the summer. There's not much left, and that everybody stays safe. Thank you so much.